Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we have a special 151st episode recorded in front of a live audience at last year's Transforming Infrastructure Performance Summit, hosted by Bentley Systems and the Institution of Civil Engineers in Toronto, Canada. In fact, right about the time this episode is published, I will be in Melbourne helping the team to deliver the next event in this tip series, so look out for a number of podcasts flowing out of that. But back to this episode, my guest is Peter Weltman, Vice Chair of the Canadian Infrastructure Council, Director at consultant Technomics, and until 2023, Financial Accountability Officer for Ontario. And in the episode, we discuss the critical issue of housing-enabled infrastructure and its impact on the future of Canada's communities, and in particular the work being done to help Canada respond to the growing housing challenge. Because Canada's housing is not just about bricks and mortar, it's about the infrastructure that makes communities livable, sustainable and connected. Roads, transit, water systems, energy grids, digital networks and social infrastructure all form the backbone that enables housing to be built, to be scaled and supported over the long term. Without this foundation, new homes risk becoming isolated developments rather than thriving communities. And as population accelerates, climate shocks intensify and affordability pressures mount, the question is not whether Canada needs more homes, but whether it can deliver the enabling infrastructure at the speed and the scale required. The Canadian Infrastructure Council is at the heart of shaping Canada's infrastructure ambitions, and it's just produced its first National Infrastructure Assessment report, which I reckon will provide essential reading for all. So, lots to chat through, and I kicked off by asking Peter why infrastructure is so critical to solving Canada's housing challenge.
Let's make a start. I've tried to set the scene in terms of what the challenge is, and I think it's clear that building infrastructure is actually key to driving that housing ambition. So just highlight how you see that challenge, and also highlight where you think the gaps are in the infrastructure we need to meet that housing challenge.
I love doing podcasts because I get to answer the way I want to, and despite what kind of questions you ask me. So what I'm going to do...
If you take too long, I'll interrupt you. So
I'm going to just back up a little bit. So the Canada Infrastructure Council was set up by the previous government, if you will, the Trudeau government. It's been in the works for about 5 years, and they decided to get around to it. And then, of course, we had a little interruption called an election and all that sort of stuff. But basically what we were set up to do, we're 12 people, 11 really smart people and me, and we were set up to advise the government, the minister, if you want to keep it simple, where is the most optimal place to invest the next infrastructure dollar? Now, in a perfect world, we would achieve that. That's not going to happen, so let's just make sure. But that's what we're trying to get to. So we're undertaking Canada's first national infrastructure assessment. Basically, what have we got? Where is it? And what do we think we're going to need in the future? Where are we going to think we need that? Where are people moving? Where are businesses moving? Where is the economy going? And how do we go from A to B? And how much is it going to cost? And how do we get there? So it's a pretty big, it's a pretty tall order. So I was telling somebody at lunch where we've been asked to boil not just one ocean, but three. Canada's a big country. The National Infrastructure Assessment, the first piece that we were asked to do, deals with housing enabling infrastructure. So we've gone through, we've talked to folks right across the country, we've done a pile of analysis. The department's been working on this, as I said, for 5 years, and they finally have an outlet for all of that research they've been doing. And it gets into things like, we have 100 water pipes here. If the population grows according to plan, we're going to need 1,000 in 20 years. How do we build it? How do we get there? What are the constraints? What are some of the key enablers to getting some of this stuff built? We'll come out with things like, the most cost-effective investment in infrastructure is to improve the stuff you already own.
When is this coming out?
So I'm told in the fall. Right, okay. Which is government speak for anytime between September 21 and December 21.
Well, it sounds very much like a piece of work that the National Infrastructure Commission did in the UK, really trying to assess the needs of the nation. Is that something you've built this model on?
Yes. We took learnings from the UK, from Australia, from New Zealand, etc., and for the same reasons. It's like we've mucked it up, really, over especially the last 15 years. We haven't built what we've needed. You don't have to take my word for it. Just jump in a cab and try to get anywhere in this city, and that'll explain it right away, and not just this city.
Housing-enabled infrastructure, you say, is one key element to that, and certainly, Canada's really focused on the Build Canada Homes report has just got, well, initiative has just been launched. It's a new federal entity, I believe, that will build affordable homes, support builders with financing, encourage better building methods. I mean, how do you see that helping to align that housing with the infrastructure strategy?
Well, unless you like well water, you can't build a house without having water pipes and roads. And, we used to build it without water pipes and roads, but that was a long time ago.
Well, you know that, Peter. I know that, but, it's not necessarily common knowledge.
The Build Canada Homes, as I see it, again, we're not really part of that. That's part of whatever the ministry is or the department's doing. But what we're doing is helping to align a little bit of that and saying, okay, we know Canada's got land and they're going to incentivize builders, but you still need to bring the infrastructure. So again, going back to what we're trying to do is, what have we got now? Where are people moving to? Where are businesses moving to? Where should the infrastructure be moving to? And then how are we going to build it together?
Because meanwhile, of course, you've also got the new major projects office, which is helping again to streamline the delivery of infrastructure. How's that help?
Well, I've been in government for a while, and so I'm a little skeptical, but I think what it does help is it sets, the North Star, that seems to be the word du jour, but it sets it's a signal. It says, we're going to try to make this less complicated. We're going to give you a point of contact. It's going to go into government, and we're going to do stuff, and here's roughly what we're going to do. So it does add some focus, but that's basically all. We don't get involved with that one.
Well, when we heard Jennifer McKelvey, the Minister for Infrastructure, talking earlier, she talked about the need to lower the cost of construction. She talked about increasing density when it came to housing. I mean, is there a risk that we focus, I suppose, too much on these unit targets for housing and forget about the need to embrace the infrastructure, which, as you say, is going to enable that construction?
Housing is really important. People like a place to live and one that they can afford. We all have, we don't all have, but I certainly have kids who are in a different situation in terms of housing than I certainly was. And there's years and years and years of problems, let's say suboptimal decisions to keep it nice and politically correct, that have led us to this situation when the incentives are misaligned. I think there's an argument to be said, and we've seen some research that says we can't even afford the infrastructure we have. I found out during this study, during this work we're doing, that a low-density suburb built outside a city or near a city cannot pay for itself. It can't collect enough property tax to pay for the build and the O&M of the infrastructure needed to support it. That's ludicrous, right? That just doesn't make sense. I guess the one thing I've learned, being formerly at the PBO and I was the equivalent for Ontario for 5 years, people don't like to necessarily pay for the full cost of what they consume, and you see it in spades in the housing piece.
So tell us about the CIC, the Canadian Infrastructure Council, which is producing this report, a series of reports. How is it actually influencing the kind of decision-making that is happening out there?
Well, I don't know that it's going to influence, but I think it's going to, the idea is to set a baseline, a reference point. So here's where we are. Kind of like accountants put out a financial statement, you know where you are, and then you figure out how you're going to get to the next step. So that's what it's going to do. We've produced some reports that have been released on what we heard reports, what have we heard generally around communities. We've had a recent one around water, wastewater. What have we heard around what it does? We've heard things about how hard it is to build, how hard it is to finance. We've heard things like municipalities aren't fiscally able to manage the infrastructure they have or that they need to build. There are, a gajillion regulations in the way. We talked about regulations all day long. I'll fill you in on regulations if you really want to about housing. It'll make all this other stuff seem simple.
I ask this because, Peter, I'm worried. I'm worried because when we talk about housing-enabled infrastructure, we're talking about breaking down long-standing silos. We're talking about getting the water sector and the power sector and the building sector and the transport sector to talk to each other and work together. Is that something which the CIC is taking on?
Well, we are certainly advocating that in any way that we don't really advocate, but we certainly do include that. We stress the importance and we look at where what outcomes are not being achieved because of what's happening currently, what is the status quo. We'll talk about things like, you need a project list, right? Builders need to know what's coming. They need certainty. We've heard that all day today too. So there'll be a lot of that in the report. Whether I'm going to be out there, yelling and screaming that we need to do this and whether anybody listens, of course, is a different question.
Well, I think you certainly seem the right sort of guy to knock heads together. Is that you? Is that a role that the CIC plays in?
I'd love to do that, but that's not quite what they have in mind yet. I might take it a little further, and maybe I'll get knocked out. I don't know, but no, that's our role is to inform, to advise, to do the analytics. Right now, we've been left with a lot of it is we're missing data. We're missing data. We're missing data. The data is not consistent. The data is not complete. We have some data over in Quebec, for example. They've got some good data. There's other parts that have no data. So that's a big part of it.
Yeah, so getting that data, getting that information, getting that policy right is one area to try to get the public sector to make the right choices. How do you get, or what is the role for the private sector in really trying to accelerate this infrastructure charge?
In some ways, it's simple, right? Because the private sector is built to deliver on a certain thing, to deliver revenue and deliver profit. So if they're good at that certain thing, and building is a key one, then let's let them build. But clear the roadway. Like, maybe that's a really bad joke, but clear the path. Manage all of the suboptimal decisions. Manage the regulatory mess, the spider web that's out there. Incentivize them to build. Incentivize others to allow them to build.
Make it easy for them to build if they want to build.
Not too easy, but yeah, a little bit.
No, but if they have invested in a modular housing factory, or make sure they've got the throughput to actually make that factory work.
Absolutely, and that's things that government can do. So I look at it as a series of risks to be managed, right? Municipalities have to do land use planning, and they have to issue permits, and they have to manage the politics, the local politics around a builder wants to put something there, so you're going to run the pipe there, and then the next week the builder's whispering in somebody's ear saying, actually, I want to build over there. And you say, well, I've got that pipe in the ground all ready to go, and now you're asking me to spend $5 million to switch it. So all that sort of stuff happens at the municipal level. The provincial level has the legislation to manage land use planning. Whether they have the political capital to impose that on municipalities is a different question. And then federally, really the feds have money, and they can align incentives to things that they think are important from a national point of view.
Getting all that knowledge, that data aligned so that you can make those decisions is critical. You made that point. And your work at Technomics, I presume, helps inform your perspective.
I got to tell you, listening to the last discussion, I'm just banging my head against the wall. We've been doing data-driven decision-making for 40 years. We do it for large and complex defense infrastructure projects, and it's like it's a new thing, but it's not.
So what's missing there? What's missing when it comes to housing-enabled infrastructure from a data perspective?
Data and transparency, right? And I know that was my mantra when I was FAO. But there's a lot of data that's missing, or a lot of data that isn't being shared. I mean, it's not being shared between builders and owners very carefully. It's not certainly being shared. Municipalities have a variety of quality of data. When I was FAO, we did a piece of work on climate adaptation and cost thereof, and we got municipal data, and it was all over the map. We had some great data from certain cities, and none at all from others. Yeah.
Well, tell us about that. You mentioned your FAO, your Financial Accountability Officer for Ontario, 2018-2023. So what insights from your career at that point, as an independent, I suppose, policy and economics advisor, most influence how you approach this current infrastructure challenge?
I have a checkered career history, as you know.
You've got the scars to prove it, yeah.
It's two things that I can think of. One is the data. Two is telling people things they may not want to hear. And that's, that was the fun part about being FAO. If you're going to build 3,000 hospitals, for example, that's a great policy commitment. But if you don't have the staff in the pipeline to staff those beds aren't going to be empty. So it all has to fit together. Plumbing, electrical, water and housing, roads and places to live. So that's the key, is getting people to think that it all has to fit together.
A very interesting piece of work that I read that you were involved in, you led, was to assess the financial impact of climate change across the province. I mean, what did you conclude? What's your advice? We're talking a lot about resilience.
Well, sure. I mean, the thought was, okay, we're a province. We have gajillions of dollars worth of infrastructure between roads and hospitals and courthouses and highways and, soon to be some rail lines, et cetera. We are not immune from the effects of climate change. What impact is climate change going to have on the operating life of these assets, and how much money or extra incremental money will it cost us as a province to maintain these things in good working order for the expected life of the project, and what is the incremental cost, and is there a benefit to doing it sooner or doing it later, and looking at different climate projections, looking at climate hazards, overlaying that against the asset, and getting a bunch of experts, not me, a bunch of experts in the room, engineers, people who actually know how to build stuff, and assess the impact, let's say on a building. Is it on the skin? Is it on the landscaping, the HVAC? So what is increased heat going to mean for an HVAC system in 20 years from now? Do you have to make it bigger? Because if you don't make it bigger and the building's too hot and you can't use it, then it's not used for, the outcome isn't there.
See, I imagine that in that sort of bit of work, the answer is always it was likely to be bad news for any politician. How do you communicate that in a way which is positive, that makes people want to take action rather than run away from it?
Well, luckily I didn't have to do that. Otherwise I would have been fired. No, I think the thing is that it's not about good or bad. It's about, this is what it is. Let's be conscious of it. We are of a lot of smart people in this room, in this country, in this province. Let's figure out how we can manage this thing that's coming at us. Pretending it's not going to happen is certainly one way of doing it, but that's not a very good forward-thinking, kind of piece. And I'm kind of keen on making sure that folks that come after me have a great chance at a good life, pay lots of taxes, so the province can afford my health care when I get old. It's really simple.
Great. No, but okay. But I imagine there is a balancing act that you have to take between that thought leadership role, but also coming up with practical solutions.
That's the key, right? It's practical solutions, and it's attending events like this. It's pigeonholing people afterwards and seeing if they can help provide that expertise to come up with practical solutions that can address pieces of the problem. But often the problem is defining the problem in the first place. That's often the very hard thing to do, and I think that's what we're trying to do as a council.
I mean, one of the clear things that across every spectrum of infrastructure is trying to think long term and trying to come up with a long-term plan, a pipeline, if you like, of projects, of interventions that will help communities. Your work that you're doing with the CRC about this needs assessment, is the end goal to try to come up with a pipeline then?
Well, that would be a worthy end goal. I'm not sure that that's going to be our end goal. We haven't been given that specific permission from the minister. That could change over time. I mean, we've seen it in the UK where they did move towards a pipeline, then they've moved it to a different agency to actually oversee implementation. Whether that happens here or not, I'll probably be long gone before they figure that out. But that could happen. But that's not really our key objective. Our key objective is to really let those folks who are actually doing, who hold the checks, who hold the accountability to voters, understand the constraints and make those decisions. And then let's get folks aligned to deliver on those outcomes in the best way we can.
Well, and I get that. But I suppose what a pipeline does is it enables you to put a number on what you're investing. It enables you to see the scale of the challenge. And I suppose it leads me to the question, is Canada investing enough in its digital infrastructure to enable it to get the sort of data that enables it to make the decisions that are needed?
Well, I'm going to dodge your question a little bit because the previous discussion was about creating incentives to provide data in the first place. And I think that's been missing. I think we're seeing it federally. Certainly in some of the defense work we're doing, we're seeing the government require things like earned value management data. We do a ton of earned value management analysis on the ships. We learn really interesting things like, why is there a slowdown? Well, because when you're plugging in modules on a Navy destroyer, they are plugs, but not just a household electrician can do those plugs. They're special trained, so there's a problem there. There's a policy solution that can address that. That's what good data can help to uncover and help to inform. And there's a contractual requirement to provide it. We're not seeing that pretty much anywhere else. I think Amar touched on it a little bit, but I would love to see IO step up and say, you want the project? I need your base investment.
Which underlines the fact that it's a slightly more complex solution than just saying, we have AI, we have digital systems, therefore we're going to have a much easier set of solutions to these difficult problems.
At the end of the day, the tool is only as good as the operator and the data you feed it. AI is fabulous. We use it a lot. We've been using it for years in terms of gathering, scraping, cleaning data, but you still need judgment to be able to make the decisions. You still need to know what questions to ask in order to get advice.
But that said, is it a reality that AI? Would you say AI and digital systems with data are going to improve the efficiency, enabling us to be more productive?
I think absolutely, without question. I think there's tons. I mean, we've heard previous sessions talk to us about some of the terrific insights you can get from data, and we do that all the time. We did a cost estimate in a week on a very complex project that normally in the old way would have taken almost a year. So there's definitely opportunities for using data.
So certainly in the UK, we hear constantly that the infrastructure sector is way behind automotive and aerospace in terms of its approach to digital systems, data, etc. That's the same in Canada, is it?
Sure it is. And we heard why, right? Earlier this morning, I can't remember who it was, who said, well, there was a crisis. That's why we're starting to build modular homes. There's a crisis. Economists call that, I'm not an economist, but I'm hanging around them for a long time. Economists call that incentives. So what is the incentive to change the behavior, and how bad does it have to get before we have to change behavior? When housing prices outpace real incomes by 6 times over the last 30 years, that's a problem.
Well, I mean, we've heard today that it's not about tools, but is it about skills? Does this sector, the housing sector, the infrastructure sector, do we have the skills necessary to embrace these new ideas?
Well, we have the skills. I don't have enough folks with the skills. I mean, they're certainly out there, but the labor force is shrinking, right? That we've been, as a society, been emphasizing, getting a university degree, not for a bad reason, but there's a time and a place, there's a purpose, and now we have a huge shortage of skilled labor. And as somebody said, you'll never have a problem with AI if you want to be a plumber or a carpenter or an electrician, or you're going to be employed for a long time.
Is it about identifying barriers as well, though?
Yeah, there's a lot of words about barriers. I mean, you have to think about it. UK is a bit different. It's a unitary state. I did a political science undergrad, so I'm so happy to be able to use it. It's a unitary state. The national government says we're doing infrastructure. There's no provinces or municipalities that have a say in that, right? And here it's different. Provinces have a lot of power. Within their jurisdiction, they have complete power. Municipalities have to work with provinces. So there's a lot of barriers here.
Well, we do have a few mayors that have quite loud voices, so not necessary. But no, what would you say? What would you say are the main barriers then that you're identifying?
I think the main barriers. Well, I think, and then what the council think. The councils, as a council, we've said data is a huge barrier. The program design, the accountability at certain levels of government mismatches their own fiscal or capability to deliver on that. So you can't expect a small town to have a fulsome asset management plan because they don't have the tax base to hire the engineers to do the work and maintain it, right? As an example, if you're up north, and here's an example of program design. If you're up north, you're trying to build something. Well, I think there's one pile driver up there, and you have to wait till June to get your money or your approval. The last sea lift, I think, is like July or late July, so you've missed it, right? You got to wait a whole extra year. So there's a lot of, and these are small examples, but they're huge impacts on those communities.
I mean, very, very, well, not necessarily unique, but they're certainly very Canadian-centric issues there where you can't work because the ground's frozen. One of the other really interesting and very powerful movements, which has been changing the way that you're thinking about infrastructure, of course, is the absolute priority to include Indigenous communities as partners in all of your activities, all of the planning that goes on. How do you see that work really supporting housing-enabled infrastructure?
We've done a lot of outreach with consulting with Indigenous communities from all over the country. It's been incredibly enlightening. Certainly when I grew up and went through school, we didn't learn a lot of this stuff. We learned very different stuff. So it's been a terrific experience. The other neat thing is that with all of the work that's been done over the last 10 years, a lot of Indigenous communities have money. They've been given money, grant money, or they have settlement money to invest. And they are a source of funds. I found this out. I was at a dinner one night, and this guy had a source of funds. I said, "Wow, we can do something." So, and they're in, so it's critical because if you don't have the buy-in, it's not going to happen.
But a source of funds, maybe, but also a source of culture, a source of ideas, and a source of new ways of doing things.
Remember, I was a budget officer, right? So my mind goes to funds first, but you're absolutely right. And I didn't mean to exclude the other things. But it's a source of ideas. It's an opportunity to give folks a chance to make a better life for themselves, their families, and their succeeding generations, and it's right there.
All of which I think really is stem from having a national vision for making sure that whole community, or these communities, are now actually brought in and made central to what's going on. Do you think Canada has sufficient national vision for this housing-enabled infrastructure
Well, I think
program?
it does now. I think that's changed a lot in the last few months. And maybe it's not a bad thing, right? We've had a lot of first-world problems for a long time, fretting about a lot of little things that maybe in the bigger scheme weren't all that important. Now the world's changed.
The geopolitics of a life.
The geopolitics of life. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the geopolitics were also a little bit rocky with the Cold War, and we've been through a period of relative calm for a long time, and that's changing again.
So the let's call it the Trump effect is possibly going to have a really positive impact on getting minds focused on the need to sort Canada out from the inside.
Well, I think it's given people a chance to be able to focus on what is arguably a nebulous outcome, like, improving GDP, to something a little more specific. It's like, we're going to lose jobs if we can't sell our steel, so we have to find a way to bring that steel somewhere else.
That said, Peter, there's, I imagine, still a lot of incentives to maintain the status quo. I mean, home ownership, really supporting house price inflation. For example, how do we build public confidence that large-scale housing and infrastructure investments, will deliver real benefits across the board?
That's the tough question, and I have my own opinions, but you asked me here as the vice chair of the council.
Give us your own opinions as well.
I think there are a lot of incentives in the system that favor the status quo. And I'm a beneficiary of one of them, which is that when I eventually sell my house, or my estate does, there'll be no capital gains on it. So there's an incentive for me to try to protect my neighborhood, at least again from the budget officer financial point of view, to maximize the value of my house. And maybe that means me not wanting to have higher density in my neighborhood. Now, there are social, cultural, other reasons. I mean, housing and house ownership is a very personal, and there's a lot of other considerations. But that's an issue. And if you're electing city councilors to maintain the status quo, they're not going to go out there and advocate for more dense housing in your neighborhood. Otherwise, they're going to lose their jobs. So there's one example of something pretty fundamental, and there's a bunch of them.
Any radical solutions to that? I mean, does something need to happen on a federal level to really try to drive forward these investments?
The radical solution is to have the data so people understand the cost of what it is they consume, and then maybe having to make them pay for it. And it's easy for me to say. It's not that simple to do. But there's something to that. And maybe I'm just thinking about it as a budget officer, but there's a lot of things here. There are still communities that don't meter their water. Right, and if you're in if you're in Australia and you heard that was happening, you'd think we're completely nuts.
So just to wrap us up and just to send us off for a cup of tea, if you could recommend one policy reform, you mentioned actually getting data sorted out, but if you could recommend one policy reform to accelerate housing-enabled infrastructure, what might that be?
I think there needs to be a change to, and I'll speak for the federal level, that incentivizes municipalities and other asset owners to maintain and manage asset management plans. So instead of writing a check for a ribbon cutting, write a check and say, yeah, your plan is really good and it's really robust, and here's 30% of the plan paid for. Go and fix the things you need to fix. And I won't take any credit for it, okay, like as a politician. So I know that's silly. That's really stupid talk. If any politicians in the room will tell me you're nuts. But that would make a big difference. That would invest in the infrastructure we already have to make it more effective. And that is the most, and that's what our council says too. That is the optimum investment right now to enable housing.
And as you say, having the data, having reports such as your National Needs Assessment, I suppose is one step along the way to making that point.
It's exactly right. It's a step along the way.
And remind us, how do we get hold of it?
It'll be on the website on the Canadian Infrastructure Council.gc.ca. There's some stuff up there right now, and it'll be blasted out to whoever is going to be on a mailing list in this room.
Fabulous. Peter, thanks very much. Very, very interesting topic, and certainly one which is, it's housing. Housing is, as you said at the top, absolutely fundamental to everyone's lives, and making sure that we have the infrastructure that supports it is part and parcel of that. So thanks very much, Peter.
Exactly.
Great.
Well, I hope you found Peter's insights into the challenges facing Canada useful. Like so many nations around the world, it is certainly racing to invest in housing and the infrastructure that supports it as key to improving the lives of its citizens. There is certainly lots to learn, and the CIC's new National Infrastructure Assessment, titled Building Foundations for Tomorrow, will be an essential read, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes for you. But sadly, that's all we've got time for on the podcast now, but there is more in the pipeline as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So, thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Peter and to the Transforming Infrastructure Performance team at Bentley. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.